welcome back to our little AAR series as Wales. This is the third video in this little mini-series thing that I'm doing, and just to explain how it works, I'm not allowed to show you any of the footage of the game, unfortunately. So what I have done is I've got an image from the Tinto maps, and I'm drawing on it in Photoshop, and hopefully that is going to be enough, and you'll be able to, kind of understand where I'm coming from, and we'll be able to get some good information out of it, potentially. But yes, this is the plan, this is what we're doing. So to explain what happened in our previous video, we expanded the Welsh influence all the way up to Windsor Castle, right on the doorstep of London itself, after finally getting the upper hand over England with our military. It did cost us a lot though, and we begin this little part of the AAR in the year 1521 with no manpower and needing 4,000 manpower to recover our army. We have 10 war exhaustion and a 20 ducat deficit in our budget. Before we go on to what happens though, if you are like me and incredibly hyped for the release of this game coming out on the 4th of November, maybe you could do me a favor, help out the channel, and pre-purchase the game with my affiliate link. There is a link in the description and also in the pinned comment. But with that out of the way, let's get into a bit of Wales dominance. Checking out our economy tab, we of course reduce our fort maintenance back down to 0, saving us 11 ducats, and army maintenance to 50%, saving us 40. The army is so expensive as we are paying massively on reinforcement costs, and you can use the tooltip in tooltip system to see exactly what is being spent when it comes to your army. For example, for me the biggest expense with the army maintenance is the reinforcing of my Lancer cavalry at 18 ducats, and as soon as my army was reinforced, I'm sure my costs will go down, so I kind of ignore it for now. I also realized that for the first time in what feels like a very long time, I am beneath my diplomatic cap. So I also reduced my diplo spending so that I'm gaining around 0.05 diplomats per month. To explain where my diplomats are going, I do have a few vassals. I have Worcestershire, I have Oxfordshire, and I believe at this point I also still have Hampshire. But I am integrating all of them throughout the course of this video. I just can't remember exactly when all of those things happened. Oh, I also have Kildare, so I'll pop that on there. One thing I need to point out as well is that the issue of fort maintenance being able to go down to 0, and in that case, the AI building an immense amount of forts and leaving them at 0 maintenance, that is an issue that has been solved on the developer's version, and unfortunately, it's not come to the creator's version yet. Hopefully, we're going to be getting an update soon, so that we can, play with what the game will be like when you guys get it, when it comes to forts and AI and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully we're going to get that update soon, but I can't really say when that's going to be. Anyway, we now have 800 ducats in the bank and 40 income, and I want to build a navy. I'm a bit sick of having to park my boats and losing maritime presence every time I'm at war, so I queue up 10 more caravels and add carracks to my research queue. I also noticed that we're short on paper in our London market, and when checking the price of the paper workshop, I also notice that the price of masonry is high. So I queue up some mason buildings in Ynys Môn and Cardiff, as they both have a mason RGO in their provinces, so stone or clay, and so I can increase the production efficiency of those buildings. I will again point out that this paper issue that I had, the lack of paper in my market, is something that never went away. I feel like maybe there should be some rebalancing when it comes to paper, because no matter how many paper workshops and later the next upgraded version of that building that I forget the name of, I never really managed to get ahead of the paper production requirement, and I don't know why that is, honestly. In 1523, King Llewellyn came of age with a respectable 58, 38, 62 stats, and I married him to Queen Dobrava of Poland. Unfortunately, she and their first child died in childbirth. Middle Ages are pretty rough. To drown his sorrows, I had him join the Order of St. George, which increased his military stat to 77. Gave me a bit of monthly prestige, diplo rep, and I don't actually think there is any downside whatsoever. I then married him to Marguerite the Oettingen Executioner. Some of the dynasty names are a bit funky. She's from Navarre, and she'd managed to conquer quite a sizable amount of Aragon. Essentially, most of Aragon, by the end of this video at least, was conquered by Navarra. They just owned just a sliver of the coastline at the end of the where we end this video. In 1526, my army was fully reinforced, though I still had to build up my manpower reserves, and with it the army maintenance came down. Economically, Wales was an absolute boom. We had a tax base of 440, income of 269, though 37 of that was our war reparations from England, that wouldn't last forever, and our balance was now 111 ducats per month. We used that money to finish the construction of 30 new caravels, bringing our total to 45, and I had them split into 3 separate navies of 15, each patrolling a naval province to increase maritime control. Essentially, I don't do this anymore, but essentially all you need is one little fleet per naval province. So a province is multiple of these sea zones, so this might be one province, and then there might be another one with the Severn, and then here it goes down here, and then another province might be down here. But essentially, you don't need to have every single sea tile covered. It is just the provinces itself, so not everything is needed, which is kind of nice. But also, I have started using the naval patrolling automation, which kind of does it fine enough. The only issue with that one, I feel, is sometimes it has navies go a little bit too small, like having 3 or 4 ships in a single, fleet. And that's just a little bit dangerous, because if you end up at war, you have a lot of very, very tiny fleets, whereas if you're doing it manually, you have, at least some amount of fight back if you end up being in a war that you're not prepared for. So there are upsides and downsides to using the automation. In 1527, despite putting a cabinet member to the task of cracking down on insurgents, my yeoman revolted in Salisbury, which is around about where I've got the H, maybe like here-ish. As I hadn't managed to fully integrate that province yet, but my regulars marched in and quickly set the English to rights. I think revolts like this should probably start with their armies raised, as unless your revolt is large enough that you cannot reach all locations immediately, they're unfortunately quite trivial to put down and way less of a danger than rebels were in EU4. And I'm not saying that rebels were dangerous in EU4, they're just kind of tepid in EU5, in a way that, you actually had to care in EU4. Anyway, Lutheranism had been kicking around for a while now, and I guess now is a decent time to go over my opinion of the Reformation. As it stands, when the situation rocks up, Lutheran preacher buildings will spawn all over Catholic Europe, and they'll slowly start converting the populace. Then, 20 countries can decide to embrace the Reformation, and this will convert the country for cheap to that religion. After that, any countries that want to embrace Lutheranism have to spend 50 stability to convert, and this price is not adjusted by how many Lutherans your country has. In 1531, Wales had 21% Lutherans, and it was exactly 50 stab to swap over, with the 20 free slots being taken up by Denmark, Sweden, and 18 minuscule German minor tags, half of whom still had Catholic rulers. Hell, Sweden also still had a Catholic ruler. This basically kills any momentum that Lutheranism has. And also, just as an aside, it's far more difficult to access this information about which countries are Lutheran than it really should be. When I click on some UI that says Show Lutheranism, it instead brings me to my own religion page, showing, of course, Catholicism. It needs a little work. In hindsight, I probably should have flipped Lutheran with the free or cheap, I'm not sure, early conversion, but now I couldn't, as 50 stab was too high a cost. A little bit later, the Council of Trent rocks up, and I propose a resolution for the veneration of saints and reliquaries to swap from Sunt in Regno Dei to Ubi Moises Ascendit. I am great at Latin, don't worry about that. Mostly because I wanted to do one, and this would give me some progress towards innovativeness. To end the Council of Trent, one needs to succeed or fail at 5 separate debates, so better off getting them started ASAP. The Pope voted with us, and I sent a diplomat to France to ask them to support my proposal for 10 favours, which they did, though Magdeburg and Norway voted against us, the bastards. After a year, though, the debate ended and we did lose. Sunt in Regno Dei would remain, which gave us monthly progress to traditionalist and a plus 20% tithe cost modifier. My next parliament rocked around in 1532, and despite some very nice debates, like expand the paved road network and conduct a census being there, I went with support the state, because while it was active, I would get a plus 50% crown power bonus, bringing me from 42% to 47%, and reducing the cost of revoking the nobles' leadership privilege from 77 to 66. Not exactly the biggest saving in the world, especially as I would 100% be losing this debate, so that's another 7 stability anyway, but I thought it'd be a bit more effective. It also tanked my estate satisfaction quite heavily, but now I could put more than just my king as the leader of my army, so it was definitely worth it. Getting rid of that horrible leadership privilege opened the game for me. The warfare that I conducted after removing this privilege was incredible. And just to remind you what that privilege did, beforehand, with that privilege, I could only put noble characters in charge of armies and navies. And essentially that meant that while I was at war, I only had one character at most, oftentimes, that could actually become a general or admiral, which obviously not a good idea. I need more than that, for sure. But yeah, tanked the satisfaction of my nobles quite significantly, but now more than just my king could be the leader of my army, so definitely worth it. It brought my stability down to 12, so it was time to work it back up. Before my debate ended, I unlocked the advanced oversea exploration, which along with plus 1500 colonial range, is the advance that you need to allow you to do open sea exploration. I instantly sent out Sir Gilbert Todd to explore the North Atlantic current, as he was the youngest guy available to me. I could have sent Sir Michael Dobby, but at 71 years old, he probably wouldn't make it past Medieris before kicking it. This would cost me 10 ducats per month, but would only take a year as the cost of exploration was 6.25. To briefly explain why the cost was this way, essentially the game looks at your minimum naval range, which I had 1250, and then does some maths with the range you're exploring, which in this case was 452, then adds whatever calculator number that is to the base cost of 3. Here, that calculation gave me 3.25, and someone better at maths than me can figure out why. In 1535, I had a new law become available to me, whether I would accept the Jesuits into my country or not. The benefits for doing so was progress towards innovative, pop conversion speed, and more religious influence. Or I could deny them and have tolerance of heretics. So, of course, I invited the Jesuits into my nation, and built them a Jesuit college in my capital, which would increase the max literacy of my nobles, convert 20 pops a month, and increase my cultural influence, and increase my monthly literacy. Overall, a pretty decent building, and I certainly can foresee no issues whatsoever by promoting the Jesuits hard. So as soon as I had the money, which was around 200 ducats per building, I put these in all of my towns. In 1537, we reached the age of reformation, and as with every age transition, we had to choose what focus we're going to use. I've only gotten to this point in a couple of other campaigns, so I wasn't immediately sure which to go with, but I ended up choosing diplomatic as one of the advances was 10% tax efficiency, and that modifier just kind of slaps. In 1538, Castile and England began the process of signing the Treaty of London, which is the renamed Treaty of Tordesillas, which meant that both England and Castile were colonizing. They had, of course, beaten me to the New World. As I was looking at where to explore next, France suffered the Huguenots' Revolt, and I'm pronouncing that perfectly, of course, which I believe is spawned via their dynamic historical events, or flavor, some such. I've not yet played France, so tell me in the comments if you know what this is all about. While France massively outnumbered the rebels, there were so many forts in the rebel territory that it looked like it would take an insane amount of time to get through it all. I ended up just lowering my maintenance again and letting my vassals head on over if they wanted to. The Council of Trent, though, ended inconclusively, and now Catholicism would view other Reformation religions like Lutheran and Calvinist as enemies, which would lower country-to-country opinion by -30, so actually not all that impactful. My latest explorations, now they weren't quite so close, but they were much slower, were exploring the Canadian Atlantic coast, which would reveal to us Newfoundland and the Labrador Sea. Both required over 16 points to explore, and we were gaining just 0.15 and 0.12. The cost of exploration has massively increased over EU4, but I do think that's a good thing. I like that you have to be more deliberate with your exploration, although I would prefer if instead of these small regions, you could set your exploration to go for a whole area, and you periodically come home to grant you new maps and ask for more money. That would be maybe a bit of a better situation. Before we managed to reach these lands, the final Treaty of London was signed, and England and Castile split the world between them. England can't even control all of England, and yet wants to control half the world. We definitely laugh at those pretensions. In response to this, I decided to do something a little bit more radical. For the first time this campaign, I would be the one to declare upon England. I built up my professional army to 12,600 men, 12 early arquebusier regiments, 12 halberdiers, 12 lancer cavalry, and 6 falconets. This army was costing me 74 ducats per month in maintenance, and I could hover over this maintenance, see which troops were exactly costing me the most. It was, of course, the lancers at 28 ducats, so you can really build your army around your economy and what goods you're producing. So if you have no horses, don't build lancers. You'd be having a lot of trouble with your economy then. I set my parliament debate to expand our armory, which would increase my manpower by 50% during the duration of the debate, though again I had no illusions about succeeding. I just wanted to begin over 50 support so I could ask for a claim on Chester. I could have gone for London, probably, but I really wanted the urbanized lands around Liverpool and Manchester, so they were the primary target. I raised the maintenance of the army and the forts, and checked the war screen. France joined with me, but for whatever that was worth, and on the English side they were joined by Brabant, Holland, Burgundy, Norway, Savoy, and a bunch of German minors. The comparison bars at the top of the screen stated that we were slightly stronger than on land, but weaker on water. So I docked my 60 barks, as I wasn't going to be able to get out any carracks yet, and we declared in 1547. To be safe, I also raised my levies. We're up to about 38,000 now, though I planned to keep them behind as support and didn't want to throw them away needlessly like I did in my last war. Early in the campaign, I had enabled the automation to have generals automatically assigned to armies, and I was pleased to see that the removal of the noble privilege was working. My 3 levy stacks all had decent generals assigned to them, which was really good to see. My regulars engaged a 5k stack of enemy regulars, and I stopped to watch the battle. The English had far more cannons than I did, but looking at them, they were all hoofnesses, so did nothing while my falconets tore them asunder. And when the lines clashed properly, it was the Welsh that rolled higher on initiative. Our left romped forward unopposed, while our centre outnumbered the enemy 5-1. On our right, things were less good initially, with 1,800 English facing off against 700 Welsh, but our higher quality troops held out long enough for the others to reach the field, and within a couple of hours began to outnumber them there too. We killed 3,700 of the enemy for a loss of only 1,200 of our own, a fantastic opening fight. In 1548, during our war, Anglicanism rocked up, which was quite surprising, as I had heard that the requirements for its spawning were much harsher than in EU4. Something about having a ruler with no male heir and a wife over a certain age and only in a 30-year time window or something along those lines. I was glad to see it though, as I kinda wanted to flip to it. After a year of war, the casualties stood at 65,000 for our side and 98,000 for theirs. A lot of those casualties were my own. My levies had been caught out by English and Norwegian regulars, and I was down to just 2,000 of them. My regulars had won every battle, but in one they had lost half their number, and it took several months reinforcing in my own territory to recover it. Worst of all, though, were the blockades. The naval dominance of England meant that, while sure I'd occupied much of North England and London itself, their war exhaustion stood at just 5, whereas mine stood at 14. We would be forced to capitulate if it hit 18, so I had to make sure we could find peace before that happened. One small problem with that, though, was that we were only on 27% war score, and we had to push further. Brabant, Holland, and a rather large German minor were pieced out, naturally for war reps, but to get Norway out of the war, the only one really making an attempt to help England in Britain, it would cost me 1,800 ducats and to annul my treaties with France, and obviously that wasn't going to happen. I did put one of my cabinet members on reducing war exhaustion, which certainly helped, and due to the English changing tactics and blockading my vassal in Ireland, I managed to get it down to 13. Still not great though by any means. In 1550, I got an event, the King's Speech, because my ruler was Welsh. Apparently his English was unbearably bad, so I had an option: embrace the Welsh language at court, or gain some prestige. And I thought, fuck it, I'm at war with England, why are we conducting our courtly affairs in our enemy's language? So I swapped. I know it'll hurt me economically as I trade worse in the London market, but hey, maybe I could make that a Welsh market at some point. Once Norway offered me a white peace, I snapped it up, and at 55% war score, I made plans for peace. I had a choice here. My war goal required that before I took any land directly, I had to first take the war goal, which was Lancaster. I did, however, want to make Chester a vassal directly. To do that, it would cost 50 war score, and to take all the land Chester owned was 61 war score, and to take Lancaster and make Chester a vassal was 72 war score. In the end, I decided to go with the direct vassal option. I wouldn't be able to take any land directly in the war from England itself, so Sussex, which I was eyeing, would elude me in this war. but I did take war reps and all alliances with Norway, and I took 1,640 ducats. I had considered stealing their market centre, but thought better of it. It was in a great position, and I planned to eventually own London anyway. Wildly, despite having been at war with me several times over the centuries, Chester started with an opinion of positive 20, but I still sent a diplomat to raise him by 220 more. The cash I got from England was used to build carracks. Having a look at the Great Powers list, of which the Japanese shogunate of Muira held all 5, the largest heavy navy in the world was 150 ships, with Majapahit coming in second with 111. Only one great power was European, France, and they had 0 heavy ships. This was a little surprising, as the Irish and English had plenty of heavies of their own, but the situation is certainly a step up from the previous patch, because I could see the naval hegemon with a single heavy ship, and I'd even seen France be the naval hegemon with none at all. Either way, the shipyards were set to task, and 20 carracks were queued up. Amusingly, England would still accept me if I requested market access preference, so I did so. London is just much better than Dublin, after all. After the war, I went to check on the New World and noticed that my explorers had done their jobs. I could now see much of the Canadian coastline, and I also spotted an English colony while in Maine. I sent out 5 colonists as I was feeling ambitious to explore Newfoundland, Acadia, the American East Coast, and 2 areas of the Atlantic Ocean. Newfoundland here, we explored, Acadia here, and then much of the coastline of, of Canada. We're looking at kind of that amount. My carracks finished, which raised my naval maintenance by 27 ducats, as each ship cost over a ducat a month. But how far we've come since we can actually afford this now. In 1554, I finished embracing all of the Reformation-era institutions, and I queued up 81 different advances. Researching at 2.41 a month, and each of these techs cost about 36.25, that would take me approximately 101 years, which would leave me 20 years behind on researching the next era techs. I needed to speed up my research speed, so I wanted to start building universities, but then I had a shortage of paper. Again. So I built a bunch of paper workshops, the second tier of that building, and then I moved on to universities. It was a long and expensive process. And then I saw tech for +1 government reforms that I missed. So I also cancelled all the techs to add that one in, as there's currently no functionality to add a research to the top of your list. That needs to change, and I'm pretty sure Paradox has seen the multiple reports asking for it. In 1562, I once again got my parliament to vote for a war against England. We hadn't expanded our army since the last war, but now with up to 20 up-to-date carracks, I was confident of not losing navally, especially as none of England's allies would join the war. I started with an assault of Chichester Castle, as I had mistakenly assumed that all of England's forts would be without garrison. We won the assault, but lost 3,000 men in the process. This was lower than I anticipated, but still not sustainable. I brought my men back into their own lands to reinforce, as they would not if I kept them in England. England's navy was stationed in Chichester, though, and it was kicked out with my siege. We won the engagement, but I lost 4 heavy ships, and this was my fault? I think I would have won without losses had I made sure to balance my flanks. I really think it needs adding as an automation option. After another battle, I saw my fleet reduced to 11 carracks as I took a fight to stop England landing troops behind my fort line. Again, I won, but the losses were too much. Humbled, I began the construction of 21 more carracks. While checking my spy network actions, I noticed that I could steal maps from England for 40 spy network, so I stole maps of Newfoundland. All that time spent exploring and all that money spent exploring, all replaced by 40 spy network, kinda feels a little cheap. Either way, with Newfoundland uncovered, I opened the Treaty of London situation, and I violated the treaty, so I could begin my own colonial charter in Akilasaiwakik. Pronounced perfectly, of course. Goods-wise, Newfoundland gave me nothing new. One medicament, a bunch of lumber, fish, and wild game. Really nothing special, but it was a staging point for me to expand my colonial ambitions elsewhere. And just to go over which parts we took, I'm gonna put that there. This is Newfoundland. We basically that word that I tried to say. It's basically just along this coast. There is a couple of locations that have relatively decent harbour suitability, so we've basically made sure to add in that one. Nothing much spectacular happened during the war, so the details aren't really super relevant this time. We didn't raise our levies at all and just relied on our army, which was enough to win us the day. We occupied all of mainland England, and other than the naval shenanigans, where we started with 20 carracks, built 21 more carracks, and ended the war with 19 carracks, it was pretty smooth. Initially, when looking at peace, I thought to emulate an EU4 strategy and steal the English colonies, but even just taking Acadian land was 32 war score, for a total of around 50,000 pops. I could instead take, for the same war score, the province of Sussex, which had 170,000 pops, give or take, so I went for land. Sussex, Surrey, Kent, Westmoreland, Cumberland, plus a single location in Scotland, war reps, and money. We went from 1.736 million to 2.357 million. The land in the north I had a plan for. Instead of trying to integrate it myself, I released 2 historical subjects. Galloway, from the Scots, and Northumberland, from the English. Both would allow me to declare war on Scotland and England, without the need to go through Parliament, as the vassals would fabricate their own reconquest casus belli, so I made a note to keep an eye on that, as I wasn't sure if I would get notified. In 1567, my colony of Aquilasiwakik gave me an event. Either I could form a new colonial subject, which would create a town in one of the locations, give it a clay pit, lumber mill, and mason. I could tag switch to the new colonial nation, or I could keep it as a fundamental part of Wales. Of course, I choose to create a new subject, and I also rename it from the colony of Aquilasiwakik to Kamau Sintaf, which means first steps. I checked, by the way, and so you could not rename just normal vassals or feudatories. It's just for colonies, it seems. In 1570, my unique location minor vassal Galloway had gotten a CB that I could declare for, called Following Through on Threat, which gave me a minus 25% cost for conquest and subjugate, so of course I declared. France was their ally, but would not join as they were at war with England and quite heavily in debt. And after checking on the Take on Debt economic action, I saw they were in 93,000 ducats of debt. It's perhaps the craziest thing I've seen from the AI thus far. I took a save and passed it on to the devs for them to look at, and then I declared the war. It wasn't difficult to occupy all of Scotland, and we fought no battles in doing so, as Scotland had their entire army in Ireland fighting against some 2-location shitter. So once I sieged all of Scotland proper, I raised my naval levies, which for some reason have a higher troop transport capacity than dedicated transport ships, and sailed my 13,000 to meet their 28,000. Even then, it wasn't enough, as I could only raise 21, so I brought all my ships together in one big navy, which was 100 total at this point, and brought my guys across. Our first fight was in Antrim, in the north, when Scotland attacked my sieging army of 6,600. My second army, again with 6,600 men, was just one location away, so they reinforced immediately. Unfortunately, the Scottish had much better initiative, so at the beginning phase of the battle, they were dealing way more casualties. But as soon as the reinforcements arrived and the front was stabilized somewhat, we were losing around 250 men an hour to their 500, and their morale was falling much faster. In the end, we lost 5,200 men to their 13,000, and my more intact army of 5,500 sat on the siege while the weaker forces retreated back to Kildare land to reinforce. After Antrim was occupied, I took a month to reinforce the stronger stack and got them most of the way to healthy. We had 12,000 men, and I had them fight the remnants of the Scottish forces, who were down to just 14,000 at this point, as they attempted to de-siege Antrim. Needless to say, this did not go as planned for them, and they were crushed. Scotland were at 100% after this battle, but I wanted land from their Irish vassal of Ulster, so we stuck around to get a couple more sieges, as while I can take fortified land that is unoccupied from the main war participant, I cannot take it from their vassals in the same way. After the sieges were complete, I demanded their full annexation, all 1 million of them. All of Scotland was of course handed over to Galloway, and the Irish lands to Kildare. We were, when we included vassals of course, now the most populous country in the British Isles. I had 2 years left until my truce was up with England, but unfortunately my recent Scottish acquisition had left Europe feeling a little tense with me, and various German states, almost all of them with over 50% antagonism with me, started joining a coalition. Even the banks of Bardi, Peruzzi and Fugger joined against me. I decided the best way to protect myself was another expansion of my navy, so 24 more carracks were ordered to go with the 21 which I had left, which I believe would give me the largest navy in Europe. My plan was to declare on England as soon as the truce was up so they could not join the coalition, and even if the coalition then declared, they would be in separate wars and wouldn't be easily able to land in Britain to aid the English. It was a foolproof plan. We also upgraded our early arquebusiers into just regular arquebusiers, which doubled the number of men in a regiment from 400 to 800, and also increased their combat power by 50%. Interestingly, the halberdiers that I had also had upgraded, which was a little awkward. I imagine if I had also unlocked the pikeman advance, then the halberdiers would have upgraded into those instead. My 2 stacks of identical 6,600 reinforced into 11,400, and their combat effectiveness went through the roof. I was not scared of any coalition. My Carracks were ready in June, so I set them to hunt navies and selected all the sea zones around the British Isles. Hopefully they will be able to react to any potential threats automatically so I could focus elsewhere, and in November I declared the war. The details of this one, again, not very stellar. I let my vassals do the fighting while I focused on sieging, and of the 10 battles fought, we won 9 and lost 1. The entirety of the English-owned British Isles was occupied for fewer than 1,200 Welsh casualties. War score-wise, I decided I was very much done with a dozen or so Irish forts, so I made sure that all of Pale became Kildare. I also took the rest of Scotland for Galloway and Northumberland for Northumberland. They had more cores to go for next time. For myself, I only took a small little bite, a little bit of Isle of Man here, a little bit of London there. Yeah, I took Middlesex in this war, and London was finally mine. It brought me to 98 war score and plus 128 antagonism. For context, Austria were currently at 38 antagonism, and I had a coalition consisting of basically all of EU4 era Burgundy, and not gonna lie, seeing that shape all in red made me really wish there was Burgundy content in EU5. Maybe someday. Anyway, that antagonism, after I gained the 1 million pops in the peace deal, was now at 63 in Austria, and even the Ottomans were up to 25. After I granted my acquisitions to my vassals, Kildare formed heir, which was nice to see. Galloway, though, did not form Scotland, so I'm not sure if formables are locked to independence and Ireland just gets a pass, or if there's something else going on. For a while, I had the automatic exploration automation option turned on, but I was a little unsatisfied with the progress, so after seeing that my colonial nation had completed the colonization of Newfoundland, I then built a bunch of market villages all throughout the island so that it could make the tools and goods necessary for me to begin a mass exploration all down the American East Coast. I was making a decent amount of money at this point, and each of these explorations would cost around 10 ducats per month, so it was no small expense to do this. But I really had to know how much of this land was going to be colonizable by me, as every bit of land that I'd seen so far was owned by England or her colonies, and to show how much that actually was, essentially I'd seen bits of New Brunswick, bits of Maine, and I think some land in like Canada, Quebec area. It was essentially something like this that I'd spotted. That was all owned by England or England's colony, which I can't remember the name of or pronounce. All of these explorations took around about 400 days to prepare, and as I was sending them off from Newfoundland, all in all with my explorations, I was spending around 170 ducats a month from 20 ongoing explorations. Again, that's not a very small amount, but our economy was booming now, and I made more than that in trade alone. Speaking of trade, I began to prepare for less than savory trade shenanigans by building a bunch of overseas trading ports around the Ivory Coast, which mostly was owned by a mix of Portugal, Verona, and the Mali Empire. A neat thing you can do here is that instead of clicking on the locations themselves, you can click on the C-Zone province, and the game would build the trade post where it would give the best results. This is super helpful from a quality of life perspective. To aid this along, I also began a colonial charter in Cape Verde, which was being contested with Serbia of all people. It already colonized 2 of the 5 locations within the province. They were growing by 11 pops a month though, whereas we were sending 61 per month. We would definitely be able to get at least one of the remaining islands. The first land on the East Coast that was revealed to me was the state of Virginia, and it was Sweden, of all people, that had colonized it, with 5 locations already owned, including the location of Chesapeake itself. I didn't bother trying to contest it, as Sweden was sending 130 pops to the region and had a pretty big head start. Next up was Pennsylvania, so like here-ish, again, a bit of Sweden. It was fully owned by Sweden and its colony of Shakamaxon. This head start was far larger than what I thought it would be. Massachusetts came soon after, and while I noticed that there was some Swedish claims a bit further inland, The coast was clear, so I set up my own colonial charter to get a head start on the mainland of America. I think that's like here. And then there's like more inland Swedish there. Yeah, something like that works. At some point, I'll just reveal the whole thing. You can see which part, whatever. I thought this would be a cool way to do it. If it isn't, it isn't. I'm sorry. I tried. I thought it would look good. Anyway. I set up my own colonial charter to get a head start on the mainland of America. It was clear that I wasn't going to be able to set up my own 13 colonies, but there would absolutely be a Welsh presence here. Asenet and Patuxet locations both had 100 harbour suitability, so as long as I could get those, and maybe a little bit extra, we would have a functioning colony that could do me quite nicely. Further south, Georgia was fully owned by Castile, so it was a bit of a bust there. I guess something like there, whatever. My truce with England was up, so naturally I attacked again. This time, though, England had actually managed to scrounge itself an army together. So while I had mine split into 4 smaller forces of 5,700, England hit those armies with stacks of 10k regulars. One army of mine was reduced to just 500 men, but survived, and I quickly rushed to merge my remaining forces so I wouldn't be overwhelmed and defeated in detail. Another loss around Chelmsford was handed to me when 7,900 Englishmen clashed with my 5,700, but this time I was prepared, and I retreated before too many losses were dealt. They then merged their army into one large 15k stack and began to siege Liverpool. Hovering over their army, I saw that they were getting food from Doncaster. So while half of my army moved to Blackburn to cut off their retreat, I moved to siege the lands, providing their army with food, more to test what would happen than anything else. When the routes for their supplies were cut off, they marched into Blackburn to fight my army, seemingly to try and find some way out of their predicament, and my reinforcements, just one location away, were quickly able to come and help, and we crushed the English resistance. All of England lay sieged by me, and I called in France with some favours so they could seize little pockets of Normandy that England still controlled. As we were only at 48 war score with the entirety of England occupied, and as soon as we could, peace was signed. Colonially, I took the peninsula of Nova Scotia, which became its own colony, and I named it Nuith Alban. We have Acadia right there. Nuith Alban, which is basically just a direct translation into Welsh. I gave all of the English land in France to France, and from England proper I gave Northumberland all of its cores, and I took all of East Anglia for myself. England now existed as a 5-province minor in Mercia, central England, with its capital in Lincoln. One more war in the British Isles would be completely mine, save for a couple of Irish minors, of course. I was pretty pleased with this result, but then I was immediately dismayed, because it was at this time that France, the cultural hegemon and my long-term ally, used their special hegemonic ability to force us to use the French language in my courts. Our culture was just not strong enough to resist, so my next plan was simple. We needed a Brittonic revival. The best way to do this, of course, is to fund artists within your nation, and we needed to get a few more of them to do just that. So I started by inviting as many artists I could to come to Wales. It would give 10 cultural influence to whoever I invited, but any works of art they created while in my country would benefit me. My cultural tradition sat at 314 and raised by 1.67 a month, but I was suffering a 45% penalty to that growth due to being over my cultural capacity. I would need to unaccept English to have it grow properly, and that would have to wait until all of England was cored, as you cannot core a location that doesn't have at least an accepted culture. To become the cultural hegemon myself, I would need to overtake France's score of 853. But of course, first I need to become a great power in my own right, and I sat at rank 25, right around the Hungary, Georgia, and Mali area with a score of 527. I would need to get to 830 to overtake rank 10 Castile, who, after my conquest of England's lands, had joined the coalition. It still hadn't fired, but with Castile joining, their naval size jumped to 321, Castile being 300 of those ships, and 55 of those ships were heavies. That was just 10 ahead of me. I had no idea if those were early carracks or if they'd managed to advance to the next era of shipbuilding and upgraded to galleons or war galleons. Began the annexation of Worcester in 1590, and due to their size, after acquiring all of their cores, it would only take around about 7 years for it to complete. I released East Anglia into 5 new tiny vassals, and I'm not going to try and name them on the map because I can't remember most of their names, like Ipswich and Essex. I don't know. It did force me to spend 127 ducats on diplomatic spending, but this was the fastest route to core my lands. As it finished, I had a couple of pop-ups all at once, and I missed that the truce was up with England, so unfortunately they joined the coalition against me as well. But I thought, fuck it, I was up for a fight. Sure, Castile scared me, but hey, maybe I could snag a colony if things went swimmingly. We had no more easy CBs, so I had my parliament give me one in Lincolnshire, and seeing the comparison bar say that I'm weaker than 44 enemies that we would be facing at both sea and on land, we declared the war. The first step were to, of course, march into England with our now merged armies, and immediately got results. The English weren't ready for us this time, and we routed them for few losses. We began to siege the remaining English land with zero resistance. Worried a little bit about the naval situation, I merged all my fleets up in my capital, occasionally bringing my 99 ships out to sink a smaller fleet that wandered too close. It was then that I saw a Castilian navy. It had just 2 heavy ships in it, sure, but checking what ships those were, I only saw early carracks, while I was rocking regular carracks, and in 9 advances time, I would have galleons. Navally, we had fewer boats, but my boats were bigger, stronger, and far more deadly. Or they would be after they had been repaired from being mothballed. Just then, a Castilian 25k levy stack landed in Ipswich, and I had 11k in the region. Wanting to test out our forces, I engaged, but the Iberians ran before too many casualties were dealt. I lost maybe 800 and they lost 500. I think they are kind of getting to learn the hit-and-run, high-initiative tactics, which is kind of nice to see. I gave chase, but before I could engage, another 25k landed, and we took battle in Dunstable. This time they did not run, and our superiority was made obvious. 16,000 dead Iberians for just 1,600 dead Welsh. We could do 10 to 1 casualties against them. We chased them down and wiped them in Norwich before going after the original 25k stack, finding them in London and killing 14,000 of them for only 850 losses. It would be an absolute slaughter if they just kept bringing armies for me to kill. The time of levies seemed to be well and truly over. In January 1599, my navy had finished repairing, and so I took it out for a swim. We lost 7 ships, and they lost 16. It was a decent start, but kind of, again, unsustainable. The Castilians then began to blockade me with a force made up entirely of galleys, so I detached the 40 undamaged carracks and attacked, and I lost. Not because of sunk ships, as none were, but because of initiative or of combat speed. Naval combat works similarly to land combat, where high initiative or combat speed, I'm not sure yet, ships will join the battle far swifter than these slow, bulky carracks, so I lost on morale long before I could bring my boats to bear, with 5 or so galleys facing off against a single carrack that was fast enough to join the fight. I would have to rethink my naval strategy and start building galleys to join my combat fleets, so I add the galleass to my research queue. Trying to break the blockade of my coast, I tried again, bringing my light ships with me this time, but to no avail. I lost 32 lights and they lost 8 ships total. I was navally outmatched until the galleass were ready. Unfortunately, due to my naval weakness, Ireland was landed upon and basically fully occupied. I tried to raise some mercenaries to save it, but even spending 1,800 ducats only got me a force that was beaten and stack-wiped in a single battle. Ireland was abandoned, and we continued to simply murder Castilians that landed in England. Ireland's loss made me wonder how we were doing elsewhere in the world, so I turned my attention to the Americas and was a little surprised by what I saw. Much of English Maine and New Brunswick were occupied by my little Welsh colonies, though Acadia and Massachusetts were occupied in return. After a year of war, I started getting separate peace offers as the various German states, incapable of making it to our island, wanted out. I accepted all that came my way, of course, until it came to the Castilian peace offer. I did want their colonies in Cuba, but felt that before the retrofit of my navy there was little chance of me achieving it, so I reluctantly accepted the peace. With Castile out of the war and my naval dominance re-established, I brought an army to liberate Ireland. I sent 11,000 and used the automate army feature to carpet siege, and watched it split into many little stacks to quickly remove the English garrisons and restore order to my vassal. It was quite satisfying to watch, to be quite honest, and it worked far better than I had anticipated. With that, peace was signed. England were made into an Exodus tag, with their capital in Pessamit, Quebec. And we took another chunk of their colonial land in Maine to give to Newydd Alban. It was done. And now all we needed to do was core this land, annex the vassals, and begin the oppression of the English to the benefit of the Welsh. It will come in another video though, as we'll leave this one off with our stunning victory and full conquest of the British Isles in the year 1600. We now have a population of 3.5 million. with Welsh making up 845,000 of that, and the English at 2.6 million. Culturally, we have 423 influence, growing at 2.6 a month, and our assimilation rate, due to the counter-espionage office government reform that we chose, was at 5.71%. Economically, the tax base is now up to 1985 with an income of 1173 and expenses of around 886, leaving us with 286 ducats a month to develop our land. The future is bright for Wales, so subscribe if you're interested in seeing the next part of this journey, where we attempt to teach these new lands how to insert unnecessary double L's into every word. Thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you then. The entirety of the British Isles is Welsh now. We'll see where it goes. Bye-bye.